Sounds great, lovely. Thank you. That's surely less than 8 minutes. Sharing best practices, and it works really well. I can definitely tell you, we have learned quite a bit from our colleagues, not only in Copant, in ISO, and even regionally. And those things we have somehow adopted, put in place, and they've made our lives a lot easier.
An action plan as such defined in the country or by the national standards body. Yes, maybe this could be a very good tool for the NSBs to better organize or having clearly what are the objectives and the results they are looking for, but that doesn't mean they don't have action. From the question you asked me, we didn't receive any requests from members to help them to develop their action plan.
Yes, I understand. So that leads me naturally to ask this next question, and maybe it's planning and programming for the next cycle, next Copant cycle. Looking forward, seeing as, yes, there may not be a lot of requests, and sometimes we have needs that we realize or we don't realize we have a need. Do you see a role for Copant, therefore, to put before the membership some type of structure, as you said? They may have activities, they may have things that are going on, but not a strategic document or a strategic approach for the climate change action plans. So the question is, do you foresee a role for Copant to be able to galvanize its members to have some type of formal intervention where there's training, there's building of capacity for persons to put this all together in a structured way on a national level that can be utilized either to guide policymakers and drive a consensus-based approach from a national perspective?
Well, if there's a need, and there's see how we can manage. I think the best tool we find in Copant to help our members are the exchange of best can do if there's an interest, is those members who already have an action, develop it, and how they follow up their action plan. And these kind of events also help our members to know who they can add. Our networking sessions yesterday, so members can bilaterally
And other activities, holds as Technical Officer for Standards, Ms. Krosky. He's passionate about standards and quality and its possibilities for increased trade and improved quality of life.
Before that, we could just, our vision really is, our mission is working together to facilitate the growth, resilience, and sustainable development of CARICOM through the advancement of an internationally recognized regional quality infrastructure. And that basically would be the difference between ourselves and an NSB. We look at the services of quality, the total quality infrastructure, not just standards development. Okay? And our vision is transforming and empowering lives through standards and quality. Based on our mandate, right, we operate through, like I would have indicated, our NSBs. So we comprise of the 15 member states of CARICOM, from Bahamas in the north to Suriname down in the south, right? Through the NSBs, that's how we operate, whether it be in standards development, conformity assessment, accreditation, metrology services, and quality promotions. And then what we do is harmonize standards and technical regulations, promote the mutual recognition of conformity assessment procedures across trading nations, provide guidance to community organs and bodies regarding matters of QI development, including dispute settlement. We offer technical assistance and educational institutions, private or public-owned companies, agencies or other entities in the community, and familiarizing them with the application of standards and standards-related matters. We also facilitate quality infrastructure, both development, both at the national and the regional level. Now, what are the standards initiatives that we have undertaken in terms of climate change? So, based on our community's strategic plan, right, a high priority for us in the region in terms of climate change is resilience, right? And under resilience, we basically prioritized energy efficiency. And so we got our mandate from our Council of Trade and Economic Development, which is our governing body in the region, that mandated us to develop standards in energy efficiency. And we know that buildings are the greatest consumers of energy. So if we could use that energy efficiency, it would help reduce our footprint generally. All right, so we set off by developing 3 energy efficiency labeling standards. One for refrigerating equipment, the requirements, one for lighting, LEDs and CFLs, and one for air conditioning equipment, right? In the development of these standards, we actually utilize ISO standard for the refrigerators, the testing standard, right? And we utilize the IEC standards for the lights, the lighting, LEDs and CFLs, and for the air conditioning, okay? So we always base our standards development on international standards. We actually reference those standards for testing purposes in our, right. Now, we also embarked on a renewable energy standard where we looked at solar water heaters. We adopted an international council standard, right, for solar water heaters, and an ICC 300-900 standard for solar water heaters. We also developed an energy efficiency building standard, that was adapted from an ICC standard as well, right? We used the International Energy Conservation Code, and we did an application document, right, to fit our needs in the region. We also would have used an ASHRAE standard, the 90.1 standard in the development of that, as a compliance pathway, all right? This standard, I must say that the member states have embraced considerably, right, by adopting it as their national standards. We also, in the future, we need to now revise this CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code, right, to bring it up to date, because that was a 2018 version. ICC updates their codes, the international codes, every 3 years, right? But when we adopted the 2018 version of the IECC, we agreed that we would update our code every 6 years. And so now the IECC 2021 version is being updated. And so we are speaking to a funding agency to assist us with the revision of our CREEBC 2018. So we're going to update it to the 2024 version. We're also looking to do standards in e-vehicles. We are now going to evaluate the standards IC have to look for appropriateness, right? To look at e-vehicles and the associated infrastructure like charging ports, battery storage, because we have a problem with battery storage in the region. Yeah, so that is the next area we're looking to go. Of course, we're going to do solar panels, right? That's already on our work program, where we're going to be looking at the international standards for solar panels, right? We're also going to be doing in the area of agriculture, we're looking at VSS standards, yeah, in terms of sustainability and also climate change and adaptation, right? Now, just to indicate to you that at the regional level, we have developed what we call a regional standard development priority plan, right? And that is what guides us, you know, in terms of the areas that we take on standardization activities for. And so we have climate change is a high priority, and I just to inform ISO and BSI that IWA 42, net zero is a high priority for the members, for us to adopt in by the member states. Okay, so that's a high priority standard for us. And within the next 2 years, based on our priority plan, we should be adopting and encouraging member states to implement through the private sectors and of course government agencies to implement the guidelines of IWA 42. Okay. Other initiatives that we would have undertaken, based on the energy efficiency labeling standard that we developed, we would have developed a energy efficiency labeling scheme, right? And we're piloting that scheme at present in 4 member states, right? Member state Jamaica, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, and Belize. Okay, so we have developed that framework and now piloting the labeling scheme with the intention that, based on lessons learned, that other member states will buy into the same, and in the final analysis we'll have a regional energy efficiency labeling scheme for air conditioners, for refrigerators and lighting. As part of that development of the scheme, we would have built capacity. We would have built capacity in terms of testing, right? Remember I said we're not just about standards development. We would have built capacity in terms of testing. And so we developed 2 centers of excellence in terms of testing. In Jamaica, they already had testing facilities, a testing lab for energy efficiency. So we assisted them in developing the capacity, right, so that they could provide the service to the rest of the region in air conditioners and refrigerators. In fact, we have brought them, they are actually accredited, okay, right now for providing those services. And in Trinidad and Tobago, they're on the way to accreditation for providing testing services for lighting, LEDs and CFLs. Yeah? So where it does not make, where the national quality, the development of the quality infrastructure is not practical at the national level, we come up with a solution for a regional solution. And hence the reason we develop centers of excellence to provide the services to the rest of the member states. So not every member can provide a testing facility, an energy efficiency testing facility for air conditioners and refrigerators, right? Because of a number of reasons. The market might be too small to sustain such an activity, and so they would get the service from that center of excellence that we would have developed. We also assisted Barbados, who was undertaking a project, right, in terms of eliminating incandescent lamps within their market, and so they would have used that lighting standard. We assisted them in some areas to be able to get that project going, and I believe they're making great progress in that regard. we're not only about standards I would have indicated, and so we would have taken an initiative to develop metrological services in the bureaus, the National Metrology Institute. And so through PTB, right, we participated in a biodiversity project for climate protection, right, where we wanted our NMIs to link up with the national hydrological and meteorological services in the various member states, yeah? Because you know, the various Met services utilize, they measure temperature, they measure wind, you know, measure rainfall, and so you really want people, that kind of information coming out of those meteorological institutions to be reliable, right? And so hence the reason that we undertook what we call metrology for meteorology, yeah? And so that the metrology, the National Meteorology Institutes within the region can provide those services to the meteorology institutes nationally. At this point, I don't know if we have Jermaine, if you want to just elaborate a little bit on that project and the benefits that it would have had for the region.
Okay, so we're going to have Mr. Damien Prescott, who will give a bit about the metrology for meteorology project. So you can join us here on the platform, Mr. Prescott. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Fulgence. Thank you, Mr. Scott, for introducing me. I'm just going to brief you on the Metrology for Meteorology project, which was funded by the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, Germany, and facilitated by CrossQ through, as well as PTB. This project ran between 2019 and closed in the middle of 2022. Recipients of the benefits of the project would have included national meteorology and hydrological service entities in the region, Antigua, Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Lucia, and Trinidad and Tobago. The principal objectives of the project were to assist in quality management systems at regional NMHSs, identify technical gaps relative to conformity assessment of sensors and devices at the said NMHSs, data acquisition, accuracy, and quality, and the dissemination of that information to regional entities as well as global entities such as the WMO and CMO, capacity building across the region in the interest of metrology for meteorology, and to build on a rainfall intensity forecast model in collaboration with the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology. The project was led by Mr. Nicole Bess, who is absent today, so I shall speak on his behalf, even though I was a participant. Ensure the accuracy of the measurements being collected at the climate centers across the region. And emanating from that project, there were significant gaps that we found where there is a need for resource building capacity. There's a need for the implementation of quality management systems for the collection of data from weather stations, hydrological stations. As recently as last week, the BNSI would have received a request from the Grand Cayman Meteorological Service for assistance in terms of training, standardization of their MET sensors and their data acquisition equipment. And the BNSI will be embarking on that venture by the middle of June. I'm spearheading that project with the permission of the director or acting director. So accuracy in data acquisition for meteorological stations is quite important, as we could well appreciate. It makes no sense reporting NDC data to the UN as regional associations without that level of assurance, conformity assessment, credibility, because data, bad data in is bad data out. And if you're collecting bad data, at the beginning, you're giving bad data out. So we wouldn't want to find ourselves regionally in a space where we cannot assure the data which is being shared with our stakeholders. In closing, I just want to reiterate the commitment of the Director of the CrossQ, Mr. Derek Omar, in terms of pursuing ventures and collaborative efforts in this space where CrossQ will be venturing or continuing to venture on a mission to acquire donor-funded projects to pursue quantity and to quantify, and qualify the assurance of the climate data in the region. And at this point, I will close. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Prescott. This sounds like something I would like to take up in the next session, where we look at the approach or the quality approach to climate change, and you're talking here about metrology services that ensure the accuracy to verify the data that we are getting. That's really lovely stuff. I just have one question for the CrossQ, Mr. St. Prix, seeing as we are struggling with time a bit. My first question, to give context to the audience here, you mentioned these three products that the region embarked on for standardization. And the question is why? Why these three standards? What was the basis for selection of these three priority standards that would indicate a significant contribution to a climate change action?
Okay, I would have indicated that basically when the analysis was made, it was found that these three products, refrigerators, air conditioners, and lighting, are three major consumption articles, right? Major energy consumption articles, right? So that's why we took those products on the development of these labeling, energy efficiency labeling standard for other, like small motors, fans. That's another high consumption of energy products. So that's basically what informed our decision on the refrigerators and air conditioners.
Can you give us some information on climate change actions that you are working on in your unit?
Thank you, Fabian. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, Green and Blue Economy, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to address you today. Okay, the Barbados (2030), but that is conditional on receiving international support, and then our that you can earn is 4,000 Barbadian dollars per month, and then there's a new, more recent tier called the Hope Incorporated, which was recently updated in 2020. The first plan was completed in 1998, but this new iteration of the plan sets a new direction for integrated coastal zone management that embraces both disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. So the policy framework helps define a risk-resilient pathway for integrated planning and that particular zone. So it basically guides the planning and the manner which takes into consideration projected climate change and disaster risk management. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, we go back. Yes, go forward one. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Go back one. Thanks. Yes, there's also a proposed project at the sanitary landfill in Barbados, and it's called Mangrove Pond, and they're proposing to construct a green energy complex and also undertake some beautification there. And the program will comprise a landfill gas management component, like landfill gas to energy, a solar power facility, a waste to energy facility, the erection of some wind turbines, and also the installation of a landfill liner and beautification of the environs of the landfill. And you see the projected cost there is almost 400 million. Policy for the agriculture sector, which I would have mentioned earlier. And it's framed in the context of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, their climate smart agricultural approach, which is an integrated approach to managing landscapes that address the interlinked challenges of food security and climate change and missions. Next. And finally, before I conclude, the last thing I will speak about is the Bridgetown Initiative, which is an initiative that the Prime Minister of Barbados is championing internationally. And it's a proposal to reform the world of development finance, particularly from the various international financial institutions in the world, like the IMF and the World Bank, to look at how developed countries help developing countries cope with
maybe one or two or three that can give us an initial indication as to whether we are on target or there's more work that needs to be done. I'm not sure if you're able to speak to it. It may be that you haven't spoken to your ministers yet, and I understand that. But if you can you give us an idea of where we are heading? Which direction are we heading?
Unfortunately, I am not in a position to say, not because I'm not allowed to say, but the reality is that we haven't done the analysis yet. We have to do another update of the, so before we can do the update, we'll also have to do a look back to see how good. So we are still in the early days before we can definitively say anything about where we are at this point.
Okay, thank you for that. So at this point in time, we will close this session and we will break for lunch. Okay, so my understanding is that we will take one more presentation from our Zoom. Thank you very much, Mr. Goodridge, for that detailed and wonderful information on
So another example is the carbon estimation of last mile delivery operations, and the standardization effort will help contextualize the ISO's GHG qualification and reporting standards and life cycle assessment standards for the local logistics market, because and it really helps to level the playing field for logistics operators who are currently relying on different methodologies to measure their carbon emission. Next slide. So for the renewables and low carbon solutions area, there are 3 examples listed here, but in the interest of time, I will just highlight 2. PV system. So due to our land constraints, we have solar PV systems installed on rooftops all over the country. And now we have also built floating solar PV systems in seawater and also in our water reservoir. So what you see on the left side of the slide is the first floating solar PV farm in seawater in the Strait of Johor in the north of Singapore. And that was completed in March 2021. So as Singapore ramps up its drive to soak up more energy from the sun, the floating solar PV farm model will open the door to more of such facilities to be built here in the future. And so to ensure its safety and performance, we have developed a technical reference that sets out the general guidelines and recommendations for the design and installation of floating PV power plants. The second example is the marine biofuel. The maritime industry is moving towards the use of biofuel as one of the low carbon solutions. And in support of this, a workshop agreement on specifications of marine biofuel has been developed, basically to assure the maritime industry on the quality of bunker biofuel supplied in the port of Singapore by providing guidance on marine biofuel that's acceptable for use, as well as best practices for their storage and handling. Next slide. Oh, so this sums up what we are doing under the 3 broad strategies of the SSC action plan, and I hope the sharing has been useful. Gracias, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Selkirk, for that lovely presentation. I have one curiosity which I need to ask. I hope you're hearing me clearly. So if
Yes.
you're interested to know a little bit more, from your presentation, it appears to be some kind of, and this is where you can correct me, integrated conformity assessment system where you're using both a combination of international standards and some Singapore standards, because I recognize the code of practice for indoor air quality. We've used that in Barbados and adopted it for our own local situation because of similar climatic conditions. So could you give us a little more about the scheme? Because I'm quite interested to hear how it's working and if there's a great demand by your stakeholders for such a mark as this.
Thank you, Fabian, for the question. So this scheme is administered by our Building and Construction Authority that oversees all the building developments in Singapore. It is a voluntary scheme, but many developers are looking at this scheme because they do have recognition, you know, as part of this scheme. If they achieve a certain level of the criteria, they will then be tiered, you know, whether you are gold, silver, or platinum. And that will also enable these buildings that are marked, that are given green mark, to enjoy maybe even procurement kind of advantages. Say, for example, the public sector, they are, when they do a procurement of, say, for example, having events, you know, at hotel venues. So if they have the green mark on a label on them, then it will enable them, you know, to enjoy better in terms of tender evaluation. And this green mark scheme is now currently used in over 70 cities in the world. You know, across whether in the region in China or that where the developers are doing projects on, they are using this scheme. So yeah, I hope it answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Regrettably, we are out of time. I'm sure there's much more the audience would like to ask, and so would I, but we have to curtail this session now, and I thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Sao Cook. Could you give a round of applause, please?
Thank you.
So at this time, we will now break for lunch. I'm going to ask the participants, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask if you can return. It is now 1 p.m. Is it possible we can return in 50 minutes time, 50? That would be 1:50. So we can try to get through the other session before we close off and head off to the cultural tour. So be back at 1:50. Thank you very much.